All right, so let's talk about Gen 2's prototype, or at least from what we can gather from it. So, Gen 2 was actually supposed to be a lot different, and I mean, not like completely different, but I mean, like, there were a lot of ideas that were sort of different, but at the same time, though, it's very possible that because it was a prototype still, they weren't really sure. Like, they might have been still changing stuff, they weren't finalizing it yet at this point. But it really does make you wonder, though. So, when Gen 2 was created, some of the characters were a little bit different. For example, like Silver wasn't necessarily Giovanni's son, so he had a different personality. You also had like Blue was actually stronger than Red. If this is correct, Mew was actually, you could actually catch Mew and Mewtwo in the game, as well as the legendary birds, instead of just trading them over. I mean, it's possible. Maybe that was a little different, but who knows, though. Um, and I think is really interesting. But it's like, imagine like your rival, like, or so like you had Blue slash Green. Again, the ex Kanto champion before Red was, and then Red beat him in the Elite Four, and then took the title from him again. And it really got me because it's like, as far as the story goes, Red in the prototype was actually before the Kanto region was revamped and reworked, and before Gen 2 was basically redesigned. Because again, Satoru Iwata came along. I forgot to mention this in the other video, but I kind of like stopped after it. I forgot to add that, and then they redid Pokemon Gen 2. Because they could put more stuff. The Kanto region was basically a lot bigger than it was in the prototype. It's very interesting, actually. Again, who knows how much more they probably would have put into it at that point, because again, like, would it have been done? But some of the stuff that wasn't done in that game yet, like, I mean, could you imagine, like, okay, so like, we know that Red is a lot stronger than Blue is, but Blue is, a very powerful trainer. Like, he's probably won more matches than he's lost. And at the same time, though, I mean, I'd still argue, even in the prototype, that Red was still technically better than Blue because he had a more balanced team. Now, here's what I want to argue, though. Is it very possible that even though he wasn't like the kind of smart ass, snarky little kid that he once was. He was kind of like kind of like Silver, but in his own way. He was his own, he was a lot more mature. He grew up a lot, rather. But basically, he was supposed to be like the professor. Again, Professor Oak was in this game, not Professor Elm. Professor Elm didn't exist at this point. Again, the Pokemon Professor in the Johto region. But if you play Pokemon Crystal, Gold, and Silver, the final version, we do learn that Professor Oak and Professor Elm, there were two different professors at that time. You know, but Professor Oak was there, though. So it does make you wonder how. It does make you wonder if Professor Oak and like what else was different about them, if there was anything. If we just compare the two games, so I would say. I want to say that Professor Oak was still the same, but what's really interesting is Blue, instead of being the gym leader of the Viridian City gym, because again the Kanto region wasn't really complete at this point, and the only gym was Red was there. But it's really interesting because Red went off to Mount Silver technically, so they probably swapped it because again the maps were completely redone, and they gave it more of like an extended version of what the Kanto region would have been like instead. Again, the map designs were a little bit different, basically reworked. But they took a different approach into what the idea was. But it does get me though, because like Red and Blue were two very strong trainers that went off to still do what they did. And I mean, I'd say Red still went out and traveled, but he was still like the trainer. Like he was the one leader that somebody actually would oppose at one point. Like he was the champion at one point, but at the same time so was Red and Green were, so like not too many people ever beat them. But they beat so many people though. Like, they were one of the greatest trainers of all time, and everybody knew who they were. Probably inspired so many people, didn't even realize it. But I still think Blue was, you know, he actually resided as a an assistant towards Professor Oak, because that was his grandson, basically. Professor Oak's grandson or nephew or grandson. I had to double check, but probably both. I mean, if you really think about it, nephews can't be grandsons, if I remember correctly. But I think so. I think that's how family tree. Again, family trees confuse me, so I'm always trying to figure it out. I mean, I usually get lost when you try to explain like a first, a second, a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a, you know, etc. cousin or half brothers and half sisters, and it's not really that hard when you look at it from like a realistic. But you know, it's, you know, you're trying to figure out like who's who and what's everybody's relationship, and it gets all over the place. But so Professor Oak had a grandson by the name of, you know, we call him Gary in the anime, but in the original, like in the games, you know, it was red/green. Green being the original in Japanese, but because Blue came out first in Japan, and it's not unnormal that they call their kids, they name them after colors. They call them Blue, you know, so we would see Blue as technically green, but because Blue came out first in Japan or outside of Japan, you know, red and blue did. So technically speaking, that's why they decided to name it. So green is blue and blue is still technically green, but again, same person. So when you think about it, it does make you wonder though, you know, blue and green are like, you know, they, again, same person, but like how their personality kind of did change a little bit and how their trainer levels were a lot different. But it does make you wonder, you know, like again, the Pokemon magic I've mentioned many times before, they still made it work. They still kept their personality the same. You know, they still were a powerful trainer. They still put themselves out there. People knew who they were, and when they got into a Pokemon battle, they knew it wasn't going to be easy. They probably were going to lose it right away because their Pokemon were just too strong, and their Pokemon had good moves, so they were experts at what they did. You know, come to expect it. But here's where it gets even more confusing. You know, let's not talk about people now. Let's talk about actual locations that a lot of people have always wondered for years. See, I was always trying to think why, like take like Lavender Town, for example. You know, why is Lavender Town a radio station when you go to it in the final release? And, well, looking at some of the prototype maps, believe it or not, it was actually a lot different. See, you could actually go to the Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, and it wasn't blocked off. There wasn't a radio tower there. It was actually the Pokemon Tower from the original. However, it wasn't as scary, though. It was actually, what was it, like 5 stories instead of like the original 7? I don't know. Like, maybe they shortened it a little bit, you know. But basically, Mount Fuji, you would go there and I think, was it Fuji? Dr. Fuji? Again, same Dr. Fuji that was coinciding with the Silphco at the time, you know, with Mewtwo and all that, dedicated his life to trying to help Pokemon. Kind of continued the story a little bit. Dr. Fuji's still alive in the prototype. We know that there was like this it was like a panda Pokemon. It was like a talisman Pokemon. Like, you know, it was a ghost. Again, this Pokemon was not anywhere in the game. This was like one of the scrap ghost Pokemon. This Pokemon was actually pretty cool. It was a ghost-like panda Pokemon. And it could go through, like, kind of remind me of, like, Pocky and Rocky, if anybody remembers that series. Again, Japanese RPGs, sort of. Or it was basically like a shooter, you know. You throw things all over the place and destroy everything. But, you know, it was an arcade, basically. Just like the many... It was also on the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom, I believe. 1 and 2 were... so basically, as far as... And they're actually coming out with another Pocky and Rocky game not too long later. I wonder how that's going to be. I haven't got a chance to check it out yet. But that'll be interesting to see how that goes. But anyways, but yeah, it was like a panda Pokemon that was later recycled. There was another Pokemon, but instead of it being a ghost type and it was actually chewing on, it was like in Gen 5, I believe. It's like this, it was like a fighting and a, kind of looked like Ursaring, but it was a giant panda instead. And it kind of reminds me, like maybe that's what they did with the idea. They took that Pokemon and turned it into another Pokemon. Instead of it being a ghost type, it was a completely different I think even Gold and Silver was even supposed to have like a piracy, an anti-piracy thing, and it was supposed to have that Pokemon, its sprite, smiling, like not directly at you, but it would like fill the page and it would have like this weird theme playing in the background telling you like don't pirate this game, a bad omen cursed upon you or something like that. It was kind of actually really interesting. I don't know if it, because of course this Pokemon doesn't exist, they scrapped it to not give away the idea that there was another Pokemon that we didn't use. So people would probably wonder what was that Pokemon. You know, very interesting. Like, so again, different locations. But anyways, basically what it was like you go there and it's like a ping say, I believe is what it was. I have to double check. But the Pokemon was supposed to be feeling like very upset, and it was being plagued by, like, it was a talisman Pokemon that wasn't feeling happy. It was being plagued, but the story went, it was being plagued by another ghost Pokemon. What's another Pokemon you can think of that's a ghost that a lot of people use for competitive play, for example, that it's very, very scary in the terms of, what it is. Gengar. Gengar was always, people always argue like it was like Clefable's shadow, and Gengar is like this really ominous. It's always got that sinister look on it, just because it's an evil Pokemon, and it's always this look. It's always thinking of something mischievous. And Gengar is always, Gengar's a hell of a Pokemon to catch. You have to trade it to get it though, but it's like, But that Pokemon, man, it was hiding in one of the paintings and they like some of the channelers and all that. They couldn't figure out like what was going on, but they knew something wasn't right there. But eventually, if you look around enough, you actually go there and you can catch, like, I think it was on level 45. But it's like, it was basically like, but because Gengar was there, screwing with this ghost Pokemon, it was using its ghost-like powers to manipulate its emotions in a depressing algorithm. But once you remove Gengar from that scenario, then it starts feeling happy again, and because it's like it's a ghost Pokemon. You can't see it, but only so many people can see it, or or vice versa. You can see it, but nobody else can see it. So that's what ended up happening. It's kind of interesting how that worked out, but here's something else that's even more crazy to think about. When Pokemon, just like Gen 1, okay, I'm going to try the best I can to explain this, because I don't think it was until like the later Pokemon games that really started recycling this idea. But when the older Pokemon, again, unless you play like prototype games or you look at like some of the maps, you probably wouldn't even know this was even a thing, because there wouldn't be really any evidence to believe this at the time. But here it goes. So just like in Generation 1, okay, you know how the Elite Four works. You beat the, so like for example, okay, so Victory Road. You know how Victory Road works. It's always the one step before the Elite Four. In order to pass into the Indigo Plateau or the Elite Four, one must overcome 8 gym badges. They go past a security gate or something like that, and then they can find themselves challenging. Like, they go through a bunch of ordeals in a cave, and then once you solve the puzzle, battle a bunch of trainers, you get to the other side, you have the right to challenge the Elite Four. And now this is where it gets even more ridiculous. So right around when Gen 1 was created, you basically could say, like, for the first 2 generations, there was actually 2 different victory roads that were actually like ordeals you had to go through. You basically had, like, the first one was like the victory road itself, and then there was like the Indigo League victory road. Yeah, I'll do the best I can to explain this. Okay, so when like Gen 1 was created, you had the original Victory Road, which was kind of unfinished at the time. It's rightfully so. You would get out of it, you would go into the Elite Four, but you had to go down like 8 other roads. Again, I got videos on YouTube if you want to kind of see like some of the prototype maps, like I mean, at least in this case, like just see what it would. You would go through like another set of floors that were kind of inspired based on like the certain areas you've been in. Certain music would play too, and you would fight more trainers along the way, kind of like you were going through Victory Road, but another style of it though. In this, and you could heal in between, like, you know, you could go the Indigo, but like you had to cross through here, fight all these trainers, and then you get to the Elite Four itself, but you don't have to fight all those trainers again. You just have to cross through the whole path again, the second one at least, and then you'd have to fight the Elite Four plus the champion, and then you win, you know. But in Gen 2, they kind of did the same thing. Put it this way, okay, so think of Pokemon Crystal, Pokemon Gold and Silver. Do you remember how there were no trainers in the Victory Road that we got in the final version? Okay, so that version of Victory Road was actually supposed to be a little bit different than what we had in like Pokemon Reforged or the 1997 Space World demo. That, like, okay, so that Victory Road was supposed to be like, kind of like a lot, it was kind of like the Victory Road that you went through in Gen 1, because you're still at the same Indigo Plateau in the Kanto region. However, though, in this Indigo Plateau, though, in this, they had you cross like 2 Victory Roads at one point, but not at the same time, though. In the way the old world map works, if I'm remembering this correctly, if Pokemon Reforged is as accurate to the 1997 Space World demo that we know of, this is what you had to do. So once you got to the Kanto region, you had to go fight Red, who was the 8th gym leader at the time. So you had to cross the Victory Road, and you had to fight a bunch of trainers in that exact map. The one that, you know, the Victory Road that you can think of, the one where your rival was at the very, very end. But he only came up to you the second you were about to leave, like, the tunnel. And he just, like, caught up to you just before you went to go challenge the Elite Four. So basically, you had to fight... There was no trainers in there. But in the Reforged version, you had to fight a bunch of trainers on a couple floors to get to the gym, and then you could and then you had to heal with items if you wanted to, because the Pokemon Center was outside before the Victory Road. Even though it wasn't that hard. But, you know, and again, you didn't have to fight the trainers again, but like they were there though. So later on, and this is where it gets even more confusing, because this was completely different compared to the prototype. Again, this is one of the main areas that was scrapped entirely, and it was actually just moved over to a different location. So again, they kept the Victory Road, the very first one in Gen 2, the same. They kept that in the same location. Then they moved the Indigo Plateau into the same spot. It was in the Kanto region. However, this wasn't the case in the original Gen 2 prototype, the 1997 Space World demo. Basically, what is New Barktown in this game would actually be directly south of where the Elite Four was. So there was, you had where you started off in the game, but you actually had a waterfall there. You couldn't access it because you didn't have waterfall at TM, or HM, you would get later on. So you had to go through that ordeal, and then eventually you would find yourself in after you have all 8 badges, you cross through the security gate. Then you enter a town that is known as Crown City. And then you actually had to cross another waterfall, and then I think and at the same time, though, it's like, this is where it gets even more of a mess. There's another Victory Road that you had to cross. It had way more trainers, kind of like we'll call it the Elite Four Victory Road, the Gauntlet, the Elite Four Labyrinth, rather, is basically. You had to beat all these trainers, and you had to go through so many mazes just to get to it. I think there's like 30-something trainers, or maybe 20. Something crazy. And I mean, they're not like that strong, but they still had like basically the way the story went was it kind of like and if you actually play the Generation 1 prototype, they've even found quotes in some of the characters in this game, and like their dialogue was even cut from the original game, but it was like some of it was kind of saved. But basically there were reasons to believe that there were certain trainers that were actually in the later, like, again, the Elite Four Labyrinth or the second Victory Road, even in Gen 1, and they always talked about how they were hired by the Elite Four itself to work. And there were some trainers that were talking about how they were, like, when they first started off, there was like one trainer who talked about how him and his cloister, he had when he remembers when he had the same cloister, even when it was a pre-evolved, what was it? Like, not cloister, but, I'm trying to think what's the Pokemon that cloister evolves into. him and his Shelter. Him and Shelter were there from the very beginning, even when they beat Brock. And he says he's talking about like how he came a long way. Again, like Satoshi Tajiri did state, there was always about the adventure, and you're talking to like all these NPCs that were on their own adventure that made it this far. They still, they weren't the greatest trainer in the world, but they still came a long way, and they still were damn proud of it. So that's what was really cool about that series. You can sort of see like the realism. You see it on both sides, and so if that wasn't enough, it was like I always thought it was just really cool because a lot of the stuff that they scrapped from those games, a lot of the maps, it made it feel more realistic. I really do wish that those games really would have had all that stuff. And I really do like the idea that you had to go through like 2 different ordeals to get there. But I'm guessing what they figured, aside from cartridge limitations, 1 victory road was probably enough, because you would just because again, you beat the gyms, you get the 8th badge. You go through a trial of puzzles, and of course there's trainers in there too, and then you challenge the Elite Four. So they basically were like, okay, we don't need a second one if we're trying to cut down space. But I guess they figured, they were trying to make it like, here's a dungeon and here's another dungeon, they try to make it look more realistic. It's like, oh, you beat the Elite, you beat the Victory Road, that's like the gym leader's version of it, but now here's like the Elite Four's version of it, and you really see, can you get past it, It just seemed pretty cool that they, I never would have guessed that at one point that they, there was like a second victory road you had to go through. And imagine if every generation had at least 2 victory roads. One was easier than the other, and then the other one was just like a lot more complex, and then there's the Elite Four itself, and who are we fighting, Because half the time you didn't even know who the Elite Four members were. But if you talk to like all the characters in the game, they might mention them at one point. I know the Kanto region did, and so the Johto. You could kind of get an idea you were going to fight Lance at some point. You didn't even know who Lance was until you met him. But at the same time, there were trainers that mentioned him. They're like, oh man, Lance is like this really strong trainer. It's like in the Elite Four, and and you start thinking, you're like, oh, who is Lance? And then eventually you meet Lance because he needs your help to handle Team Rocket at the final version of Gen 2 that we got. They talk about the Rockets taking over, trying to find Giovanni, and they don't know where he's at, but they had like other people that were trying to fill in for him, and you even had like these other characters like fake Professor Oak and all that. And again, if you don't, imposter Oak, and if you actually look at some of the Pokemon cards, some of the older Pokemon cards, there's evidence to believe that these weren't just scrapped ideas that that somebody else made. They weren't just fan made. These were real from Game Freak, but scrapped because they probably didn't need it. It was completely reworked into something else, and they probably had better ideas as time went on. Because again, when you study something for so long, you eventually get more ideas that are even better than the original ones. So I can totally see why, when Gen 2 was finally rewrote into something else, why a lot of the ideas they scrapped didn't really make it into the final release. I'll tell you what though, this is kind of a little off topic, but going back to scrapped evolutions again, they had there were reasons to believe that Pokemon like Pinsir, the same Pinsir that you would possibly catch in the Safari Zone, the one that was just as rare as Scyther was, actually had another evolution. It was called Prax or something like that, and it was a steel bug type, if I remember correctly. And it just really was interesting because I was like, wow, man, that Pokemon looks really intimidating. But what's really interesting, though? That Pokemon was actually recycled into Heracross. But it's kind of funny, though. Heracross doesn't evolve into... Pinsir doesn't evolve into Heracross. But it's, interesting to think that, Pinsir is like a stag beetle. And then we had another beetle, a Hercules beetle. Heracross is even though Heracross always comes off as a really happy Pokemon, because it's not really, you don't really see Heracross, comes off as a scary Pokemon. And the more I think about it, if anybody's ever played Mega Man X3 or Rockman X3 for the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom system, I swear, Gravity Beetle reminds me of one of the Mavericks. Gravity Beetle reminds me of Heracross. Now I want to know if that's where they got the idea from, because Heracross, because Mega Man X3 came out in 1995 and 1994 in Japan. It's very possible that maybe the Mega Man X series actually inspired some of the Pokemon. Strange, because Gravity Beetle was actually supposed to be kind of like a Hercules beetle, but a completely different Pokemon. So Hercules, it wasn't a beetle that could fly, but it was a Pokemon that used like gravity to be able to justify its flight patterns and all that. Very interesting. So maybe there's a connection there. But anyways, yeah, but you see, that's why I make these videos. That's why I love Pokemon, because it's like, you know, tons of people have played it, tons of people have beaten it, but how many things are still unleft that a lot of people don't know? You know what I mean? Very interesting. Satoshi Tajiri must be very proud of himself, not just because not just because they succeeded in what they wanted to, but like how many people they've inspired because of it. How many people want to know, like me, want to know how they did this. You know, all the different ideas, all the different secrets, all the stuff they didn't use. You know, definitely an interesting series that has a lot going for it. So yeah, so Pokemon's got a lot of secrets that we don't know about yet, that we're still slowly uncovering. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, like at least as of right now anyways, that I found that it's worth talking about. So some of the Pokemon that were originally scrapped. Oh yeah, like some of the evolution Pokemon. Like I found this out a while ago. If you actually play Pokemon, if you actually play Pokemon Reforged, again going based on 1997 Space World demo logic, some of the Pokemon, like Umbreon for example, was originally a dark type, right? Well, what if I told you that Umbreon was actually a poison type at one point? Wasn't a dark type, but it still had like the special defense and the regular defense, physical defense, like attributes. Like it was a really strong Pokemon. But it's really interesting to think, like when you fight Red in the and I do believe this is true. I do believe this is true. When you fight Red originally in Gen 2, he has an Espeon. Again, Espeon's the opposite of Umbreon. So if you actually fight Blue, I don't think he actually had one on his team originally. But at one point, you know, if you actually fight him in the original game, though, like the prototype, he had an Umbreon. An Umbreon like Red did. An Umbreon opposite to Espeon. Like, let me rephrase it. And Espeon looked a lot different. Like, not the physical appearance, but the... Not like its attributes. Like, but it looked more like a sun-colored Pokemon. But in the original, like in the final version, Espeon was all pure, you know, because all the AV evolutions try to match whatever type they were. Like, you know, like Flareon's blue, or red, Vaporeon's blue, Jolteon's yellow. Espeon is purplish, dark purplish. Umbreon's pure black because of the dark type. Eevee is a normal type, so it looks like a normal fox. You get the idea. Sylveon is a normal type, so it looks in a fairy. No, it's a fairy type. So it looks like a fairy type. You know, it looks like it's got that pink color. Not to get confused with the Espeon's purple, but you know, it matches its type. It looks like it, and it has its type. Eevee, God, Eevee's adorable. Eevee is adorable. But if I had an evolutionary stone, I wouldn't hesitate to evolve it, though. So the only question is what types. I still think, I mean, as far as Pokemon goes, I mean, I'm begging Game Freak. I really am on this one. As far as Eevee goes, I would really love to see all the different types that haven't. They don't have to be dual types, because I'd kind of get a little bit complicated. I understand, you know, they probably might want to do things their way. But as far as Eevee goes, I mean, I'd really like to see an Eevee evolution for every single type Pokemon there is. So if there's like 19 types, I think right now we're up to like how many Eevee evolutions? 7? 10? So you have Eevee itself. We'll count Eevee in this case too, because it's a normal type. So you got Eevee, Sylveon, Glaceon, Umbreon, Espeon, Vaporeon, Flareon, Jolteon, Leafeon and Glaceon, Sylveon, 7, 8. I mean, if I'm counting correctly, it's like right around. You had the original 3, you had 2, and you had another 2, and you had 1. So it's like basically like 9. It's 9-ish. So we're still like half and half, you know. But I'd really like to see, you know, it'd be really cool if they actually did add, like, imagine like a dragon type Eevee, or a rock type Eevee, or a ground type Eevee, or a, let's see what else is there. A bug type Eevee, Espeon, yeah. Umbreon, Espeon, Glaceon, Leafeon, Flareon, Vaporeon, Sylveon, Eevee, Jolteon. So 4, 6, 4, 6. Yeah. So basically, you get the idea. Yeah, you get the idea. There was 4 in the original. There was 2 more in the Gen 2. But believe it or not, here's what a lot of people don't know. And I've said this multiple times. Maybe some other people know this too. Leafeon was actually supposed to be in Gen 2, but it was moved to Gen 4. It's very possible that Glaceon could have been in Gen 2, even though there's no evidence to believe it right now because we haven't really found like a prototype Pokemon that's kind of based on it. But I'd really like to think that'd be really cool. And Leafeon, I'm actually really surprised at how they changed the concept of how you even get a Glaceon in a Leafeon. I swear, you know, a lot of people go after Game Freak and they say that, you know, some of the ideas don't make any sense, but at the same time though, I really do like the way they think. You know, there was like, instead of using just like, you know, evolutionary stones and forcing a Pokemon to evolve through like evolution radiation and all that elemental radiation, they would use you know, like you had to go to like a certain location that actually had like, they'd find like these stones that were like kind of like evolutionary stones, but they weren't evolutionary stones, and you'd have to level up the Pokemon through that. You know, it had to be like by that rock, you know, those mystical rocks. Like in Gen 4, you actually either had like if you had an Eevee but you wanted a Glaceon or a Leafeon, you actually had to find the moss stone in the forest, or you had to find the glacier, the icy rock that would evolve that was found somewhere out in the middle of the mountains, and you'd evolve it around there, and once it gained a level, it would level up, you know. That was actually pretty clever how they figured that out. I actually thought that was pretty cool. You know, even before ice stones were even a thing with the Aloha forms in Gen 7. It's really cool, you know. They take like something from Gen 4. It makes me wonder, you know, because it's like, you know, evolutionary stones were there from Gen 1, but at the same time, it's like, you know, how many ideas were based on other ideas that they had that maybe they didn't utilize until like later on in the series. Like, you know, you had certain Pokemon that were there, supposed to be there from like way back before they were finalized. They were just moved into a later generation, like Leafeon, and I'm shocked, man, at just how many ideas they had. That most of those ideas they did have them, but they didn't use them until later on, or they scrapped them all together, and they still are sitting on somebody's like prototype folder, and you know, they pull it up every once in a while, like we can use this and turn it into this. And you know, Pokemon it's a series that you can just drive yourself insane trying to find like every single detail that, you know, we're still trying to find like some of the comparison, a lot of the ideas that are based on a lot of stuff that a lot of people, like, you look at the final version of the games. I think the hardest, put it this way, this is like the easiest way I can explain it. You take like the final versions of the games, and you basically know what the series is about because that's what you remember so much. But then you try to find like prototype data where it was originally something different, and you try to go on that build, and you try to think, well, okay, you know, how much stuff did we not have before that was originally, you know, scrapped or changed, and you know, like you try to like rationalize all this. I'll give you another example. Like I remember in Generation 1, Satoshi Tajiri stated that they had roughly 300 Pokemon before the games were, but they decided to lower it down to 191, and then later it was 151. So a lot of people try to figure out like what happened there, you know, not just cartridge limitations, but they decided to make sequels to Generation 1. So that way it was a prequel to Generation 2. A sequel to Gen 1 would be Gen 2 in this case. So you have all these Pokemon and all these story elements that kind of coincide together hand in hand, but again, differently at the same time though. So, but at the same time though, somewhere during the development of those games, eventually they found out, well, hey, now we got even more ideas plus the ones we had before, and now it's like, okay, now we're right back to where we started with Gen 1, but on a much larger scale. So now we have, you know, we can kind of get an understanding of what was different and what was the same, but at the same time though, we come to the realization that a lot of Pokemon were scrapped and they were never used because they already had more ideas than they had the cartridge limitations too. So it does make you wonder, because when you start jumping into Generation 3, it's not a sequel, but it's a completely different game though. Because again, if you play like Pokemon Ruby Sapphire, I mean, this was a big deal to a lot of people because not only was it the next step in Pokemon, but it was a completely different style game, because at the time we were so used to playing on Game Boy cartridges, but when Game Boy Advances started coming out and all that, you know, like it really started making people really wonder, you know, like how much different is it going to be? How much more capable is this system capable of dealing with, you know? I mean, despite the fact that, you know, yeah, you had like the lighting issues and all that, but, you know, it didn't stop people from still wanting to play Pokemon. I mean, we went from like 251 to like 386 Pokemon officially. But it's like you're sitting there thinking, like, you know, as far as Pokemon goes, you know, how many Pokemon did they scrap altogether? I'll give you another example. And we'll start talking about Gen 3 prototype stuff once I kind of stop making videos based on Gen 2 a little bit, because I feel like there's some more videos I want to kind of explore before we really start getting into this. I think like the prototype data for like Gen 3 and onward are a little bit easier to kind of explore, because like there's not really so much lost history as there is like as far as cartridge limitations go, because they basically at that point already had like more cartridge space to deal with, so they had a lot more, aside from deadlines. They didn't have to make cuts and vote on stuff for the most part. Like the ideas they had, they could finalize it. They had the space, and they just put it in the games, you know. And yeah, you can only imagine how many Pokemon they must have scrapped altogether. But man, it's crazy though. Like, I mean, like I'll tell you what, if you actually think about it, a lot of people state that you had in the prototype version of Gen 2 or Gen 3, some of the Pokemon that they actually scrapped were actually too similar. Like for example, you had a Pokemon that looked like a flying Latias and a Blaziken. So it kind of was weird, because it's like, well, wait a minute. You know, Blaziken is a fighting Pokemon. It's not a flying type. It's a fire and a fighting type. But it's like, it's weird though, because it still retained like some of its, like, I don't know if it's like its ears, but it's like, you know, the way its hair comes all the way down. You know, Blaziken's like kind of it's got like that V-shaped, and you know, because it's a fighting chick Pokemon. But it's like, it's interesting though, because like you look at like its Mega Evolution, and it looks a lot. I mean, yeah, appearance is going to be different because it's a Mega Evolution, but it's almost like they took its beta design and sort of reworked it into its beta version. It's Mega Evolution, and it's weird because Latias was a Pokemon too. They were two different Pokemon. As a matter of fact, you know, it was kind of like, you know, those Fakemon fusion videos people make where they take like an existing Pokemon and they move its sprites around and all that. Kind of like, you know, like Super Smash Bros. When they like decide to like cheat and like move the character models around, you get all those like weird animations and all that. But it does make me wonder, you know, how is it that Latias and Blaziken were at one point related? You know, they don't look the same, but they like the same colors though, sort of. But even a shiny Blaziken is a lot different than a shiny Latias. Because I don't think Blaziken's orange. But Latias is like an orange and or is it a yellow? No, it's an orange. Because Latios is green instead of blue. Interesting palette swaps indeed. But it's like, the reason I bring this up is because you see that though. you see, like, you know, at one point you had these two Pokemon that were like related to each other, and it does make you wonder, Latios and Latias are brother and sister. Latias is always female, Latios is always male. Do they reproduce together? I am not sure, actually. I know in the games they don't, but, lore-wise, do they? Or are they the same Latios and Latias? Is there more than one Latios and Latias? I don't know. I'd like to believe so. Because, even if you think of the anime, even trainers that use legendary Pokemon, there have been trainers that had more than one Pokemon that were just rare, but maybe they were an offspring somewhere. For example, like Annabelle uses like a Raikou, and you could have caught a Raikou too at one point. So you have two trainers using two of the same legendary Pokemon. Where the other ones come from, I don't know. Very interesting indeed, though. So, lore-wise, it doesn't have to make sense because it's a video game, but at the same time, though, you never know. It could just be because they're legendary Pokemon. Doesn't mean there's only one. There could be another one somewhere else because they're gods, basically. If you want to follow, like, the lore of, like, Arceus. Arceus created the Poke Universe and all that, and much more. But even Arceus came from another dimension that its parents came from. So basically implying that even in the prototype datas, we find all these Pokemon that were scrapped and all that. There very well are more Pokemon waiting to be discovered that we haven't discovered yet. So in a way, it's not like Pokemon's really contradicting itself. It's actually building up more suspense that there is very well Pokemon that have already been there. I'll give you another example, and I can make a whole nother video about this, but this is, I probably will at some point, but here's something else to think about. There's always been I remember Proto Mario actually made a video about this like a couple of years ago. He talked about how, like, there was a Pokemon theory where, is the Pokedex itself created? Like, how is the Pokedex itself, was it filled at one point by somebody else? And if you really think about it, it actually makes sense. Because again, it's what is the Pokedex? It's an encyclopedia. So all the information that you are finding has already been pre-recorded into it. But by who, though? The answer would be the Pokemon professors. I think, and if Professor Oak, if we were to originally give credit to Professor Oak for creating the Pokedex, the original Pokedex from years ago, and even like the later ones. And I mean, there's other Pokemon professors too that probably created even the more advanced ones too. But if we are to believe that Pokemon is what they say it is nowadays, where, like, a trainer gets their trainer card to become an official trainer, and then they're actually handed down a very rare mission by said professor, whatever region you're talking about, to go on a quest to find all this stuff. They are actually fulfilling the same adventure, but in their own adventure, rather, that the Pokemon professors previous to them probably went out and proved as well. So it's very possible. So here's something else to think about. And I'm actually thinking that this is actually true too. There was another like, we'll focus on the first generation before we jump into something else here. Let's talk about Professor Oak. Because Professor Oak was like one of the very first characters that you come across in the entire Pokemon series. So even if he's not like the main character, but he's there though. He's there from the beginning to the end, even if you don't see him all the time. He's there because he's a character that your character reflects upon many times, or you always have, like, Oak's words echo in your head. Now's not the time to use that, or you know what I mean. But it's like, but basically the idea was that, Professor Oak was the one that originally created the Pokedex. So it's like, okay, so what if Professor Oak actually went on his adventure many years ago? Because again, we have evidence to believe that Professor Oak, it was a lot younger at one point. Again, Agatha was a part of the Elite Four. Okay, so is it possible that even Professor Oak, along his journey caught all 151 Pokemon at one point and actually recorded that knowledge because he's a Pokemon professor, including Mew, including Mewtwo. Like, they researched this stuff. They knew about this stuff even before it became what it was. So at one point, even Professor Oak even managed to do what he wanted Red and his grandson to originally do, and maybe other people too, for being, or even Leaf, if we want to go by the unused protagonist in the original, like Yellow, for example. If you want to say she was, even though she's not a main character, but let's say like even in the anime or the mangas, if she's even in those games, like, what was she going for? Is it possible that whoever was inspired by Professor Oak, they were entrusted with an encyclopedia to go ahead and go on an adventure to try to make sense of the world around them, find a bunch of stuff that could help them with their research and the whatnot, and there you go. So it's very possible that that information had to come from somewhere even before the adventure started. So Professor Oak not only grew up and was, like, I wouldn't say like in retirement, but like, his life goal was to research the world around him. Again, Professor Oak was a professor in exploring the qualifications of the habitats of the Pokemon, examining them. He was a scientist, a researcher, and he had just tons of details, like books, scientists that were working with him that were also trying to make sense of all of it as well. The aides, again, the professor aides, just many qualifying capability positions that were just like a huge influence all throughout the whole Pokemon universe. And you could say the same thing with all the other Pokemon professors to some degree. They were all they all had their own adventure at one point, probably. They were Pokemon trainers that probably became so strong that they eventually just became who they were, I mean, there's reason to believe, like, okay, so, like, again, talk about Professor Oak. You take 2 of his 3 Pokemon from the very beginning. Whatever Pokemon you choose, whatever one your rival chooses. And then the last one just stays behind. And at the same time, though, Professor Oak goes out of another journey and raises those Pokemon to pretty strong levels, stronger than most people in the game. He could probably even beat his grandson, even though but here's something to think about, though. What if Professor Oak was originally the original champion at one point? He could beat his grandson. He could beat Lance. He could beat Agatha because he beat her many times, even years later. She always made jokes about how, he decided to fiddle around with his Pokedex and his research, but he still knew a lot about Pokemon because he was studying Pokemon, So what if Professor Oak not only was a Pokemon trainer, like he was back in his younger days, but, like, what if he was also, like, the original Elite Four champion before, but he retired from it? Something to think about. And the same thing with all these other Pokemon trainers, Maybe before the Elite Four became what they were, maybe the Elite Four was what they were. Like Lance was still an Elite Four member, but, maybe either Lance could have been the champion at one point. Or maybe not. Maybe there was no champion. But, Professor Oak could have came along and just became that champion and then retired, and then his grandson became the champion. And because, again, I mean, you think about it, it kind of makes sense because, like, you think about how, like, just before he fights Red and just before, you can kind of get evidence to believe that, the difference between Red, Green becoming the champion after Blue or Green has already achieved it is because, he becomes the champion before Red, but Red's on his way to challenge the Elite Four. And the way the story goes, they call up, I don't know who you want to say called up Green. Maybe Green called up his grandfather, called him up and said, "Hey, your grandfather." He's like, "I just beat the Elite Four. I am now the Kanto region champion of this area." Like, I mean, that's like an accomplishment that anybody could achieve, Most people don't even reach that point, but let alone beating the Elite Four itself. you know. So, like, you know, he wanted to go congratulate him in person, but by the time he got there, you know, he'd already been beaten by Red, who was already trying to do the same thing. And then, like, you know, Oak was, like, not really too surprised, but at the same time, he couldn't believe that, you know, by the time he got there, he'd already seen somebody else beat him. And it was just kind of like at the last second, but, you know, he was filled in on the details, but I believe it was Lance was, like, watching him from the, like he was notified or something. Like somebody was keeping tabs on them, I guess. But it's interesting to think, like, you know, all the small details you really don't notice in Pokemon, but like maybe that's why it makes sense the way it does. You know, Professor Oak being the original champion, but you know, he moved on to becoming a Pokemon professor that later on was passing off so much influence, you know, because even years later, you know, he wasn't just succeeding in becoming what he did. Like, you know, he wasn't just a useless elder. You know, he dedicated like every second of his life to something he did, he loved, and tons of people just knew who he was. He succeeded in life, left a legacy behind. You know, it was like, you know, even in other series, you know, you hear about Professor Oak in like all these other areas and all these other different professors all throughout the whole series. And, you know, how many Pokemon did Professor Oak really know about that? Otherwise, you know, did he originally catch all 151 or even more? And then Red surpassed his grandson, he was expecting him to do the same thing, but he did it even better than him. It's just crazy, like, you know, how much determination really gets you. But again, wow, this video is almost an hour long. But, you know, but this is just something to think about, you know. How many ideas Pokemon has yet to uncover that we should still talk about? This would actually be really interesting, actually. I just feel like, you know, we're still scratching this. We haven't even gotten to the end yet, but this is, we're going to cut it off right here, but yeah, something to think about. Like, imagine that, like, as far as Pokemon goes. You have a series where you have tons of Pokemon that not only were scrapped, but you also had, like, different details about certain characters that were in the final version of the games that very well could have been extended upon. Like, imagine that, though. Like, you know, and again, that's why I want to make another video, like, maybe talking about, like, not just Lorelei's past, again, the Elite Four Lorelei, but like Professor Oak could have been the very first champion, or like even completed the Pokedex because somebody else had already done it before you did. Where did all that information come from? Well, first of all, Professor Oak was the one that created the original Pokedex. So that, and then he is a researcher, so, and because he's a really skilled trainer, and he's even confirmed himself that he went on a quest even before you did. It's very possible that Professor Oak, and there's even reason to believe that, you know, Professor Oak was even in the final version of the game. You could fight him in a glitch fight, but like the prototype maps, we've actually gotten some prototype information that Professor Oak was in fact supposed to be the final boss of the game. Even stronger than your rival was. They're pretty close to him, but maybe Professor Oak was still stronger because he had, you know, he had the Pokemon that your rival didn't take. That he actually had the super effective one against him. So, like, you know, let's say you take Charmander, then he takes a Squirtle, and then, you know, they're left with the Bulbasaur. So Professor Oak left the Bulbasaur there, but he raised, you know, of course he's not going to just leave it in its little capsule. He probably raised it, helped him out, plant some trees here and there. You know, and he eventually evolved that Bulbasaur all the way up until Venusaur and went out and caught some more Pokemon when he probably wasn't looking, right? So, yeah, you know, Professor Oak was a hell of a trainer, you know, and he loved what he did. You know, what better way to spread kindness and love and raising your Pokemon than also let them live their lives, you know, freely, and, you know, you learn something with them while you're researching them. You're training them up, and you're researching their habitats, and it's like three things at once you're doing, and it's like the concept it's a lot of work, yes, but it worked though, you know. He succeeded in something he loved to do, and he actually had the evidence to show it. So I wouldn't be surprised, you know, and all the other Pokemon professors, I wouldn't be surprised if they also had more secrets that they're not telling us either, and their stories too, that whatever that may be, you know. Like you had Professor Elm, you had Professor like for example, like in Professor Elm, like if you remember, like you know one of his aides gives you that aid, the egg, and you know he was talking about how like you know they're trying to figure out like all these different Pokemon, all these baby Pokemon, and how they're hatching and like all the pre-evolved forms they get, and he's like shocked that. He's like, did you ever find out what that egg hatched into? And he's like, you know, he's shocked when you tell him like it hatched into a Togepi and all that. And then he's like, he wanted to see it and everything, like just how much different Pokemon were. Like you'd have like all these different egg designs, and then once the Pokemon hatched into whatever Pokemon it was, because again every egg was different. You know they were, and I think that's what was also pretty cool about Pokemon. Like you know you really got to see like just how many details went into that game. You know, and then all the subgrouping and all that. And it's crazy. Like just to think that you know how many ideas they must have had before they finalized it, and then how many ideas they probably didn't, the massive amount of ideas they probably had that they didn't even finish. Like it's nuts, man. But again, once we find more evidence, we'll make a video about it. But until then, we'll kind of end it right there. So hopefully yeah, expect more Pokemon theory videos very soon. If you're not subscribed, again, subscribe. Tell me what you guys think, especially with the Pokemon Professor Oak. You know, what do you guys think that it's possible? And it would make sense. You know, Professor Oak's been around for a long time. He's battled Agatha many, many times in their younger days, and she was an Elite Four member, but Professor Oak was even better than she was. So it kind of makes sense that maybe he was the champion at one point. And then he just, I mean, I don't know who Lance would have been the champion if, you know, who, because Lance is a lot younger than Agatha and Oak, so like maybe he was still fighting his way through the Dragon clans. But you know, it's interesting to think like even how like you know Lorelei and Bruno had their own stories, but you know they were there in the Elite Four. But I mean Agatha was actually a lot stronger than they were. But at the same time though, you know Lance came along and just he took his place before Agatha. And then all of a sudden, Professor Oak probably came along and beat every single one of them because he knew too much. But, you know, then he created the Pokedex, and, well, he wanted somebody else to experience the same thing, but in their own right. So I think that's pretty cool, actually. Definitely would have a grand, you know, it would definitely be a hell of an elder to hang around with if you actually had that. If you had that kind of privilege, if you had a grandparent that was actually like that in I don't even know how to pronounce it, like what's the word, very inspirational. I was gonna say it's like something else is another word that's like inspirational, but basically that's what I'm trying to get at. Very energetic and very optimistical is another way you could think about it. But yeah, Professor Oak, even if he is a fictional character, will always be one of my favorite characters in any series because just you can learn from that. You know, here's a guy who dedicated his life to doing something, and he spent his whole career building up to it. He made money. He had a big fan base. He succeeded at what he did. And everybody, and in a way, you could even say that people were still talking about him even when he wasn't there. You know, again, like Agatha. You know, where did Agatha get? She got to the Elite Four. But the reason she became who she was because she was always trying to find somebody else that was, like, even stronger than Oak was. But she could never beat Oak, no matter how hard she tried. So it was like, okay, now you have this, you know, only very few people could ever beat, again, Lorelei, Bruno, and then finally Agatha, but maybe not too far away from Lance either, because, you know, Lance was, you know, only so many trainers could beat Lance because you had to have the right setup. That's how much confidence Lance had. But, you know, but if he lost, he would be like, wow, somebody actually beat him. Like, you know, yeah, it's pretty cool, actually, when you really think about it. How the series really changed a lot, and how much different it would have been if they never would have scrapped a lot of these prototype datas. I mean, I'm just shocked, man. Like, just how much different Pokemon would. It probably would have been even more difficult too if they would have kept like some of the move pools they had, like for like Mega Fire and all that. Because they did. Because again, Satoshi Tajiri did state that they really did use, like, they were inspired by other games like Final Fantasy Legends for the Game Boy Color, Final Fantasy in general. You know, like the home consoles. But it's something to think about. You know, one inspiration from another.